Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. This show is brought to you by Simplifying, which has been helping build trust in travel for over a decade. Through in-depth conversation with aviation leaders, Sustainability in the Air breaks through the current clutter and provides a clear roadmap for the future. It's about time we embarked on creating a net zero future for the industry, together. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simplifying.
Welcome to another episode of Sustainability in the Air. And today we are with the CEO of Heart Aerospace, Anders Forslund. And for those of you who have been reading the news, Heart is on a roll of late. Investments from Air Canada and Saab, United upgrading its entire pre-order and firm order to the new plane, a complete switch to a larger aircraft, reserve hybrid technology as opposed to pure electric. You name it, and they have been on it. Anders, it's been quite the journey. I mean, you had a very big announcement where you shelved the 19-seater plane in favor of a 30-seat ES30. What's happening?
Well, so it's funny. So, I mean, to really answer that, I'm going to have to backtrack and really talk about how we formed this company. So, we're a Swedish startup. We're based here in Gothenburg, Sweden, and our inciting incident was that Norway announced in 2018 that they want all their short-haul flights to be 100% electric by 2040. And we saw that while there was a lot of, eVTOLs, urban air mobility being built, there was nobody building like an aircraft for the Nordics. So we started a research project here in Sweden. My background was in aerospace product development research. But ended up getting into Y Combinator and getting our first seed funding and started working on this ES19 aircraft. And it turns out that the sort of design philosophy behind this aircraft of being really focused on, not innovating for innovation's sake, but using a kind of traditional design of airframe, aluminum, high wing propeller aircraft, and being very focused on just reliability, efficiency, safety, and also being plug and play. So being something that we could use in existing infrastructure, using sort of existing business models. That turned out to, we did that for the Nordics, right? But it turned out to have had a much wider appeal. So obviously when we closed our A round, we got United Airlines on board. And that was just a start. But then, the issues that we've, felt a little bit with the ES19 started becoming more pronounced. And there were some things that were completely new, like if you want to operate an aircraft in, part 121, you have to, you cannot actually fly an aircraft that's part 25 or part 23 if it's been type certified after like March 29th of 1995. So, which was like one of these things that just popped up and we're like, okay, that's an additional risk. But obviously there was also things like, we were struggling with keeping under the 19,000 pounds, 8,600 kilogram weight, max takeoff weight. Batteries are heavy and you end up, removing a lot of luggage, and that's really not good. And finally, the reserves, right? So reserve rules are, the most stringent ones, but also kind of the standard ones are 45 minutes of reserves and 100 nautical mile alternate. And that's so punishing, and you end up cannibalizing on a lot of range on your batteries. So while, the reserve hybrid or, using an APU, essentially, which is nothing novel in the aerospace industry, has always been on our radar, we sort of shied away from it a bit initially because we didn't want the added design complexity and the cost. But now we've also seen that, before we're making this announcement, we haven't announced who's going to be supplying our APU or our turbo generator, but we have seen that there's a maturity in the market and that there's several players developing that type of technology that we could use for that. So, and actually upsizing then from 19 to 30 seats, that gives you pretty good unit economics to start with.
So let's dig into that, right? There's a lot in there you've just shared. Let's start with
I think I touched upon everything. That was
yeah, and I think that sets the basis for the entire conversation here. Let's start
Yeah.
with the APUs. I can see where you've gone from a fully electric to electric plus APU. We all know APUs. For people who are not familiar within aviation, APUs are what's turned on
Yeah.
when the aircraft is on the
Yeah.
ground. For example, to keep the HEPA filters on and keep the air circulating. That's how most passengers may have experienced it, because especially in the last 2 years during COVID, airlines kept APUs on to keep the HEPA filters running.
Yeah.
So obviously there are lots of manufacturers here. We are not reinventing the wheel here. I had Scott Kirby on this podcast last season, and he was very bullish about Heart and about the 19-seater, and he was very bullish about all electric. But yet there were these criticisms. It's too heavy. You need this reserve power. How does hybrid? Let's dig into hybrid. How does hybrid help you solve some of the challenges you had with fully electric?
Yeah, I mean, so as I said, essentially, if you're flying for the ES-19, you had like a 400-kilometer range, and then that's included like 30 minutes of reserves. But if you increase that to 45 minutes, and then you add 100 nautical miles, which is like 185 kilometers, you're down to about 150 kilometers. So you're essentially carrying the majority, more than 50% of your battery, like 60% of your battery, you're never using. And we thought, fine, because then we can recharge really fast. And actually that sort of ratio would decrease as batteries get better. So you actually get more and more usable range. But we see also that battery technology is developing faster. And one of the things that is developing fast, actually fast charging and cycle life is developing even faster than energy density. So it's actually, you get to a point where you actually, you can already do a pretty fast charge, even if you have depleted the battery more to like, you have 30% left or so. So then you end up just needlessly cannibalizing range, when you can just put in a system that carries so much more energy. So jet fuel is unbeatable when it comes to carrying energy, and that brings you a more efficient aircraft overall. So that was like one of the reasonings. And another thing is that actually we started thinking a little bit more about logistics. So we have some LOIs in New Zealand, for instance, Sounds Air, and we also have a good relationship with Air New Zealand, who was also at our hangar day. And also, how do we deliver these aircraft all over the world? How do we deal with the logistics if we can only fly these short routes? So actually putting in a turbo generator allows us to ferry this aircraft long distances. Aircraft are not like cars. You can't put them on a container, or you can't put them on the back of a truck, at least not fully assembled. So you need to put final assembly halls, even with the hybrid configuration, you need to put them at different places around the world. But it's one of those things. And like, if I can be like, it's also that the ES-19 was something that me and my wife and co-founder, we came up with very early in the process, when we were like two people in the company. I drew the first plane myself in CAD, and I made the first renders. Now I have 100 engineers coming from having built probably every regional aircraft that's been out for the last couple of decades. A large team from Embraer, and it kind of felt like they were, I'd made my kids' drawings of an aircraft, and they were coming with all of their experience, and they were like forcing it, to like with their brush strokes fill out the details and making it work. But they actually had much more in themselves. So it was kind of a nice way of me actually saying, okay, let's drop it. Let's see what you actually guys, if you can play out your entire repertoire and like do what you're best at, what you can come up with. And that was not just the engineering team, but it was also the commercial team, which really knows how to run a market exercise and speak to airlines and operators around the world. So,
right, it's been already quite a growth journey, right?
Yeah.
It seems that you had this baby plane that was close to your heart that you drew yourself, and now that baby's all grown up, and it looks like a ES-330, ES-30 actually. But would you say it's fair to say that ES-30 is now a low emissions aircraft rather than a no emissions aircraft, depending on whether or not what kind of fuel goes in there, whether SAF or normal jet fuel goes in there?
No, I would actually disagree with that. So the reason, as I mentioned, if you have an all-electric plane, you're flying, you could, if you have to have all of those reserves, you go down for 400 kilometers to 150. The ES-30, which carries, 11 more passengers and has 2.5 times the cargo capacity, that's actually, that can actually fly 200 kilometers on batteries alone without turning on the turbo generator. And I think that trend line will keep going. So I think, we've designed this for zero emissions. And quite soon, when you start deciding to build a hybrid plane, you end up in the discussion, are you going to optimize for the short routes or for the long ones? Because you want to optimize for the long runs, you don't want to have too big of a battery pack. Because if you can only use that for part of the journey, then it becomes very inefficient. So we double down and say it's the short routes that we're going to do initially. That's where we see the market is. That's where we see, the main value proposition. And that's why we came up with the name of Reserve Hybrid.
That is very interesting, right? You can go longer distance in this reserve hybrid mode. Now, one question I saw in your conference you had recently was, if you reduce the seats to 25, you have a 800 kilometer range. Firstly, explain that range, and secondly, what will this passenger experience be like compared to a 30-seat turboprop like the Saab 340?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what we need for route flexibility and also for the logistics of it, right? So I don't think that people are going to buy this aircraft to use it as a 25-seater flying an 800-kilometer range, primarily, right? But if you're an airline that's planning your entire fleet, you want to have fleet commonality, you want to, all of those things, and you fly a lot of short routes, it makes sense to have that ability. So that was like one of the main drawbacks of the ES-19, right? So, but again, from a climate perspective, you really get the best benefit if you keep, at 200 kilometers, you're zero emissions. At 400 kilometers, you're 50% of emissions of a comparable plane. And that starts becoming diminishing returns. So when you're at 800 kilometers, it's roughly on par with the traditional turboprop. So, but you still need that flexibility, right? So that's the reasoning behind them.
That's very interesting, and now we are really getting into the weeds, right? In terms of range, it's fascinating to see the diversity of clients from Air Canada to Sounds Air and New Zealand. Of course, you had the executive speaking there. What is it that these airlines see in the ES-30 that they are able to just convert from 19 to 30 right away? Usually, I think this is a pretty long process for airlines.
First of all, I mean, let's just be clear that even though, this was the first time the world heard about the ES-30, the airlines that were in the room, they had known about this for quite some time. And in fact, when we embarked on this journey, the first thing we did was obviously to give United a call and say, this is how our think, and they're like, yes, this is good. And then we call other airlines and they go, yes, because this is what we've been worried about as well. So it was really, it was one of those things that, sometimes we think of change as something that, we make it a virtue to be like, oh, we were right from the very start and we've never been wrong and blah, blah, blah. But actually, I think the real innovation is being adaptable and showing that you can actually listen. That's the journey that we've been on at Heart Aerospace. And I think actually in doing so, airlines have appreciated the candidness that we have displayed here. I think we don't want to be pitching them. We want them, and we want to have a discussion with them. It's in our mutual interest that we figure out that this is not something that they can actually use, that they feel that they can operate profitably, and that it fits in the route network, and it's not something that they want to dip their toes into. Because we're going to be building this aircraft. So our airline engagement has always been very patient.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is you're seeing airlines as partners rather than only customers. Like, here's my product, go buy it. Instead, when working with a partner, you're being really adaptable and open to suggestions and feedback. And a 30-seater is something more airlines have operated around the world than a 19-seater. We know that for sure, right? So I can see the comfort level there coming. Now, the ES-19 was meant to enter service in 2026, but the ES-30 will enter service in 2028. Yes, it's a couple more years, but how will you meet this target?
There's a real urgency here. Like there's a real urgency, and we have these mandates like 2030 in Sweden, we want to have all fossil fuel free planes. We'll include all the biofuels, but in Norway you have 2040, everything's going to be electric, and that's not too far into the future. So you need that type of, like say Apollo project type. Okay, we have to do it. We have to set a deadline. It has to be ambitious, and it has to be falsifiable. And it has to be something. I don't mind people like, oh, you said 2026, now you say 2028. I think that's great, because it's not something that I feel like I want to apologize for, but I want that accountability. And at the same time, the problem with, there's, you can look at 2028 from two different ways. You can say it's either too far into the future, the climate crisis is happening now, or you can say that it's too sporty and ambitious. So, you're kind of facing criticisms, whatever you do. But I kind of think about it as, this is 100 things that we need to do at the same time. And we need to get all of them delivered at the same time. So it is kind of, it's like conducting an orchestra, and you want to increase the tempo the orchestra is playing. But if you're at a tempo where somebody starts missing their beats, then it's just going to be noise, right? And you're gonna not be heading in the right direction. So it's like, how comfortable can we be in doing that? So what we've done is we've hired the great program management team. They're coming from the Embraer E2 project, which was like the gold standard for program management, and it's been like, okay, what can we do that's realistic? How can we do that? And then obviously engaging with suppliers, and suppliers are the ones that are also worried about too tight timelines, and you don't want them to be putting out money and making investments and then finding out that the other supplier that's doing the other system is not living up to their side of it. So we think that this 2028, this is what we can do, and this is how fast the orchestra can play.
Okay, fair enough. And therein come in a few of your music analogies. So I'm already enjoying those.
Oh yeah.
It's one thing to say, okay, the 30-seater will enter into service in 2028. But you also mentioned that you hope to produce a 50-seater, but potentially an ES50. Do you believe that battery technology will evolve quickly enough and fast enough for you to make this 50-seater?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, we're planning for the future. Like we've built a 2+1, like a round cabin that we can extend, and then we can build a product family. So that's definitely what we're going to be doing. I think that, and I see that technology is going to be evolving quite rapidly. It's probabilistic, and I think this is the clear. The hindsight is 2020, or whatever the expression. I'm bad at American expression. Is it hindsight is 2020? That's right. 2020 vision. The past looks deterministic, but the future is probabilistic. And we are engaging with a lot of battery technologies that we think are really exciting. And we want to build, but how we approach the future is to how do we manage the different scenarios? How do we do scenario management? Because I think of the ES30 as this sort of airframe that has maximized the beneficial outcome in a bunch of different scenarios, right? If it's that batteries take another giant leap, then obviously we're really primed for this. Is it that the other technologies that people are working on, which is hydrogen or something like that, if that's maturing faster than we'd expected, we think that we've still built a good airframe or actually just a good, not necessarily that we would use the airframe as a hydrogen plane, but the technology that we built and that we help bring to market and that we bring certified will be beneficial for everybody. So it's I think that's the way to look at it. And that's also one of the things to be working with the future is to try to keep it as close in time as possible. If you're running a project and you say that we're building a program that's going to have enter into service in 2035, 2040, 2050, you don't even know. The people that are starting the projects are not going to be the ones that are finishing it, right? You're not going to have a chief. It's even even the Soviets had 5-year plans, right? So it's like a 5-year plan is really where humans can sort of work efficiently. When you start getting longer than that, it tends to be longer, even longer, because it's even longer. You sort of get that snowball effect. So I really think that it's planning not more than 5 years ahead in the future. And now I'm saying that even though I have a 6th year now to my entry into service, but I have 4 years until we'll be starting test flights. So
right. No, I appreciate your candid focus on accountability for yourself. Because, like you said, it's so easy. There's so many airline executives we speak with right now who say, oh, we'll be net zero in 2050. But right away, the CEO won't be the CEO in 2050. So, you're just getting the ball rolling right now.
Yeah, and I think obviously net zero in 2050 is an admirable goal, but it starts, by now, right? It's kind of like, I don't know, if an aircraft, if you're an aircraft that's standing in in Frankfurt and say, I will be in land in America in 8 hours. And then you're like, okay, but have you taken off? Like, have you departed, or are you still waiting at the gate, right? Because you can't say that you're going to be somewhere in 28 years if you're not already rolling, right? So I think that's, and I'm trying to work on that analogy because I think it's so important. Like the time you get up in the air that's when you can start thinking that you're actually approaching your destination. If you're not in the air, you're not approaching your destination. And that's why I think that it's really strong that some airlines are willing to make this engagement at this early stage to see what we can do in 2020s.
No, absolutely, and that's admirable. Something you mentioned just before we were talking about this Frankfurt analogy was the different fuel systems that exist. So you obviously went from battery electric to now hybrid electric. Did you ever explore going the hydrogen cell route? Why electric?
I mean, I think that our main take on this is that range is a little bit of a red herring. That it's actually focusing on the unit economics. Like when we spoke to United, when we spoke to Mesa, for instance, operated hundreds of 19-seater aircraft that were serving hundreds of communities across the United States. Their average length was like 170 miles, or like 270 kilometers. That was their average, and they were flying hundreds of them. So that means that 50 of them, like if it were 100, then 50 of them were flying less. Yeah. So, and we can even ramp up production that fast so that we could serve that much market. So the question is, how do you fly the very short routes profitably? And there you go to batteries. It's a technology that is highly synergetic with the automotive industry. That's been very successful in the automotive industry. It's been actually so. Whereas hydrogen has struggled in the automotive industry, it might mean that it can still work for aerospace, but then you have to push that technology development yourself. And electric technology, the motors and the batteries work the same way as your electric skateboard does. It's almost, it's the same technology as in your electric toothbrush, right? So if you can put in a toothbrush. Yeah, it's really simplifying it, and obviously I'm not, there's, and the reason that if the sort of physics or the technology is simple in and of itself, that's not to say that it's going to be a cakewalk getting it certified for commercial air travel. But that's exactly why you should be picking the simple technology, because those things are actually going to be proportional.
Right. No, that makes sense. Fair enough. You're learning from automotive, you're learning from other industries. The other aspect is you decided to build the entire plane from scratch yourself. Compared to, I had Greg McDougall, the CEO of Harbour Air, talk to me on this podcast about retrofitting Magni-X and how they could fit in and turn their beavers into electric. Or if you look at Zero Avia, which is retrofitting the Dash 8 with hydrogen engines. Why didn't you think about retrofitting as opposed to building a new plane from scratch?
Now, I mean, first of all, I think, let's be clear. I think there's a real value in that there's some sort of, that people are trying out different things and that there's a portfolio of different technologies being developed. And I really wish people that are doing competing technologies, I really wish that they can prove me that their technology is great and even superior to what we're doing. I wish we were all successful. And we're all picking different battles. We're saying that this is where we're going to be. The battle that I want to pick, I'm not trying to do autonomy. I'm not trying to do vertical takeoff, or we're not trying to do autonomy or vertical takeoff. We're not building a carbon fiber aircraft. We're not, experimenting with new types of stuff. We're trying to minimize risk. But the bull that I want to grab sort of by the horns is really I think we need an airframe. I think we need an airframe that is built for electric, that has de-icing systems that are operating electrically, that has, cabin pressurization, that has all of these stuff that is built for this, that we get rid of hydraulic systems. It's a simple aircraft, but it needs to be like that, because that can be then a platform for this new technology. I think that you will hear, I didn't listen to that Harbor Air, but I imagine, they have to spend so much time then working on how do you work with this with the hydraulic system? How do you add all of that? And then it comes to even if you have that, it is you're still reverse engineering. And so the great thing about a new aircraft is you have the source code of the plane. Whereas a built aircraft that you just buy from somebody is kind of like a compiled code. And that it makes it really difficult just to do the calculations, right? Because how did people, what was the design intent behind this? Why is this thick? If I put this motor instead of that, do I have to, I have this much, can I, it becomes all of these weird second order effects that sort of permeate through the airframe, which if you have design intent of the entire thing from start, you don't have that. And another point is mass production. Who owns the IP? Are you bringing in old planes from people? Are you or are you striking a deal with the people that make the old turboprops? Some of these are not being manufactured anymore. It's the world needs an OEM that can build airframes. And that's the bull we're grabbing by the horn.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, right? You know the battle you're picking, you know what you're doing and what you're not doing, and that's fair. I give that to you.
And also, maybe I can just give a little bit of a plug and a shout out to the great team at Aernova in Spain, which is just amazing, and they've been working with us for a few years now. And it's not even though we're building an airframe from scratch, the knowledge is not on how to do that. It's they have that from working with almost everybody in the industry, right? So
that's brilliant. All right, Aeronova might include them in the next season of the podcast.
Yeah, you should speak to Juan Carlos. They're a great company. I love them, and it's great to go there and visit them in Vitoria because they have so great Basque food as well. So maybe you can do a podcast, actually going there
on location.
On location,
that sounds good.
Yeah.
On location after the ski trip in Gothenburg. Talk to us a little bit about the charging infrastructure that will be required for a number of ES330 aircraft to arrive at a regional airport every day. I assume you will need charging capacity at both ends of the journey, or is the idea that the aircraft will have enough charge for both legs?
No. You have to recharge it, unless you're flying this kind of Scottish Isle short hops, or maybe there's a few hops in Norway where you could do, but otherwise you want to do the recharging and also the preconditioning of batteries that come in the charging. What we've used for our demonstrators, we built a full-scale demonstrator. We used the CCS2 charging, which, we had a charger from ABB that could run up to 340 kilowatts, which is really fast. So at the ES19, we had to meet our requirements, we needed to be at 250, and this could go. Did I say 340? I meant 350. So that was already doing it, but then you need 4 of those, one for each nacelle. Now we're seeing the next generation technology that is happening a lot, actually. I don't know how much I can talk about it, but the MCS, which is coming out for the trucking industry, is megawatt level. So actually, we don't think that that's the sort of, it's not a technical challenge. And I think it's not going to be that expensive. It might be some, who knows what this sort of aerospace sausage machine is going to throw at us, but I think that it's going to be very, very simple from a technology point of view. And we're also seeing that there's around this a lot of activity from airports, especially here in the Nordics. But that's also why we've included airports in the industry advisory board that we just launched.
Okay, and how long will it take to charge a plane? Let's say, a flight lands from Gothenburg to Stockholm.
Our requirement is 30 minutes, but it's dependent on how far you fly, right? So another way to look at it is like 2 minutes in the air, 1 minute of charging. So and we see that this technology, there's a lot of battery technology that's meeting that. The issue is with heat management, but there's also technology around that. So yeah, obviously, it might be with batteries that you will sometimes, the batteries that have the best range do not have the fastest charging and all of that. So it's all a bit of a trade-off. But so that's one of the reasons that we really like working with airlines and airports and asking them if you can choose between this and all of that. And obviously cost comes into the play as well there.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know that, it makes sense. 60-minute flight, 30-minute charging. That's what it takes to load the passengers and bags anyway. One interesting thing I remember from your presentation recently was the capacity for cargo and space for a galley. What is the passenger experience going to be like? Will it be very similar? Will it be very different?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we think is really important. We don't want the passengers to feel that it's, that this is a step down from flying a turboprop. We want to exceed the levels of comfort that they're used to. So obviously this is a pressurized cabin. It's a standing aisle, unless you're as tall as me. So, but it's like 180 meter aisle. It's overhead bin for small carry-ons. But then you also have a large luggage capacity with the industry standard of like 25 kilos per passengers. So that's just, that's the checking the boxes of what a turboprop that could operate as or like a regional plane that's a hub feeder needs to do. But then it's also obviously it's much more quiet. Like it's a silent taxi, which I think is amazing. It's low vibration, so it is. And then, inside of the cockpit, it's state of the art glass cockpit. It features a fly-by-wire system, to make it a smooth ride and all of that stuff. So I think this is going to be just on the merit of being a very newly developed turboprop. It's going to be, a generation ahead of what's out there.
Right. No, that's really good to know in that regard.
Or a newly developed regional plane. Like I shouldn't call my plane a newly developed propeller plane.
Okay, fair enough. I've liked what I've seen until now in terms of the passing experience. It seems it will be, you're trying to maintain status quo, or if not make it better. Definitely not making it worse. The other question is just around funding. The Wisk CEO said, it's going to require $2 billion to build his new aircraft, which is just a air taxi. The Boon CEO told me it's going to require $6 to $8 billion to build his supersonic jet. Where do you lie in terms of the required funding, and what's your financial runway like?
First of all, I mean, we're humbled with the investors that we have. We have Breakthrough Energy, EQT Ventures, Lower Carbon, the European Commission, and also then United Airlines, Mesa Airlines, and Air Canada. So I think we're off to a good start. Our aircraft, actually, despite being a much larger aircraft, our funding projection is a little bit less. So in the order of $1 billion, I would say. And this is because we're not building a vertical takeoff plane. We don't have to develop and certify all of that stuff. We can use the established supply chain. We're building a conventional turboprop. There's two ways of looking at making a calculation like this. One is to do like the benchmarking. I think it's called a RANDAPCA 4 model, which was, I think, but anyway, but then it's sort of the cost of an aircraft program is dependent on two things. It is, the max speed of the aircraft and the number of passengers. And we're a slow flying aircraft. Then we have a little bit of an addition because we have some new technology on this aircraft. But then we've also done the bottom stuff, obviously, based on the sort of RFIs, RFPs we have from suppliers and, the ramp ups and the baselines that we have from all the projects that our team has worked in the past.
Right. Okay. That's heartening to know.
So yeah, but maybe I can say one more thing about funding as well, is that it's, it's all, our goal is to, as quickly as possible, within the next few years, get to a place that the project is so mature that we can start using different types of loan instruments as well. And that's really how there's massive funding opportunities for the green loan guarantees, etc., that's coming up with the European Green Deal.
Yeah. No, that's definitely encouraging. Both in the US as well in the EU, there are certain, trends that are very encouraging for to be in the kind of business you are in. Now, I've heard you speak very passionately about the benefits of electric aircraft when it comes to rejuvenating a lot of smaller airports and communities. Can you talk a little bit more about this, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's so first of all, I think, everybody's working from a vision. Like perhaps if you were talking to the Whisk CEO, he was telling you about his vision. And I think our vision is to create a vast decentralized network of regional planes that do point to point, that is not just everything is going to the hub, which is the capital city of the country. And that you could actually fly fast. It's distributed, all of that stuff. But the nice thing about that vision is that it's not something that's, I think it's William Gibson who said, like, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So where's the future that I'm talking about? Well, it's actually, you go to Norway, and that's how it works there today. Like, that's our vision. That's our vision for the world. That regional air travel should work like regional air travel is working in Norway. Why is it working in Norway? Well, it's because it's subsidized. It's subsidized by it's being a rich country that has a very focus on having a vibrant, countryside, vibrant rural communities. But we think that if we can just make that work without the subsidies, just by replacing the expensive part, the jet engine with the simple electric motor, then we can actually make that sort of vision a reality.
No, absolutely. And it's not just the rich countries. It's worked in Norway, and I think that's a good example you used. But I know India has a very powerful regional aviation scheme. The Philippines has thrived with ATRs flying between islands, for example, really small ones. Forget these countries. If you look at a vast country like Australia, Rex, which used to fly SABs, still fly SABs, has been one of the most profitable airlines in the world for the longest time, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about aviation, that it's just this. People think about it as the least, the least sustainable mode of travel, but it actually has the potential to be the best type of travel if you can because it's the footprints. It's all in the operational emissions. You don't need much ground infrastructure. The plane has very high utilization rates. The batteries are being really, really used. So we can turn this around and show that air travel, actually flying, is the ultimate from just the sustainability and cost and all that perspective. Actually, one thing we have this thing called the Nordic Network for Electric Aviation here, and we actually talk a lot about mobile phones. So I don't know if you remember this, but the GSM standard for like the mobile phone protocols came from NMT, and all of these was developed in the Nordics as a Nordic collaboration project. And that not only made us that, my parents and people in Sweden had mobile phones really, really early on, right? But it also created an industry here with companies like Nokia and Ericsson and all of that stuff. So that's been our vision, right? And that was how we've been driving this in the Nordics. But the big, obviously mobile phones have revolutionized life in the Nordics, but it really has revolutionized connectivity in places where there were no landlines. That's where it had its biggest effect. And maybe regional aviation or electric aviation will have its biggest impact. We'll have early adopters like the Nordics or North America or New Zealand, but its biggest impact will be places where there actually are no planes right now. I think Philippines is a great example that is rapidly expanding. Indonesia is a place where, in our last Tiger Day, we had a pilot from Indonesia that was there talking about, how Indonesia, which is, as one country, is 10 times the size of the Nordics combined, and they have 17,000 islands, and they have quadrupled their air travel in the last decade. So, this is I think that this is eventually going to be the real big market for this.
Yeah, I can totally relate to the mobile analogy. I was born in India, and I know India, my parents didn't even have a landline when I was growing up in India. But now every single cousin of mine has multiple mobile phones and multiple mobile phone lines in each phone, and is the world's cheapest data. I remember living in Uganda in East Africa, and we had M-Pesa, and I moved to Canada, and we didn't have any e-payment services at that time on mobile phone. It's like, wait a minute, East Africa is way ahead of you. Kenya and Uganda were using M-Pesa 10, 15 years ago. So you're absolutely right, where, while the Nordics is acting as a catalyst for electric aviation, the most innovative uses of these might come in communities which are currently underserved or not served because they're too small or too remote or too far.
Yeah, and I think that if we can show that this becomes, it's also rapidly, it's scalable. Air travel is scalable. It requires minimal ground infrastructure. So and it's also something that's flexible. The problem when you're building trains, for instance, is that you're cementing the demographics, right? You're saying that this is the city we're anointing to be successful. This is the city that is going to be outside of the train line. And it's kind of puts your foot on the scales for the economic development of places, whereas flights are flexible.
Right, absolutely. Now let's stick to small communities right now. I used to live in Toronto and lived through the entire debate of Porter Airlines trying to fly the C series or the A220 into the city airport, and that was shot down because of noise complaints, even though it was a smaller plane. But noise and operating costs are obviously the reasons why these regional routes no longer exist. Do you see a new regional boom with community airports springing back to life again?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, local emissions is it's one of the things that that would be what I would be worried about living close to an airport. Noise. I think we get a silent taxi. Like there's a big debate in Sweden about Bromma Airport, which is in central Stockholm. It's the ATRs and they're taxiing. A taxi with a turboprop. It's kind of like, you have an RPM that you have to spin the shaft at, and you don't want to be going forward too fast. So what do you do with all that energy? Well, you actually just you pitch the blades so that the energy becomes noise instead of propulsion, right? So or noise instead of thrust. So I think that, and then even at the takeoff, then you will have much less noise because you don't have any noise from the engines and all of that stuff, and much more pleasant noise, I think, as well.
Well, noise is one thing, right? The other aspect with hybrid electric is the non-CO2 climate impact. That's often not talked about. Everyone talks about CO2 emissions, but then what about the NO2 and the water vapor and the contrails from the ES30? What are they looking like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we want to limit those as much as possible. So it's going to be, zero emissions. 200 kilometers, and even if you fly longer, you're turning the thing off at takeoff and landing, so you don't have anything there. And then the problem with some of these other stuff is generally generated when you're flying at high altitudes. So I think already today, like we can also, I talk a lot about turboprops in this podcast that like they're so bad, but they're actually what's out there. They're by far the best for the climate, right? A turboprop that flies low, that flies slow, that has propellers instead of jets. That's what you should be flying if you're flying a regional route, if like from a climate perspective. I mean, we're seeing that a lot. People are in Sweden, for instance, BRA, the Braathens Regional Airlines, which is one of our partners, they used to have the BA 176s with, the 4 jet engines, but now they're all turboprops.
I've flown those.
Yeah. So
they used to be called the hair dryers, those engines.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And ironically, they've had like a second lease of life now with both the Airbus project, the electric one that they ultimately canceled, and also now I think with Ride Electric, which is also looking at one of those planes. So it's interesting.
Right. Okay. Final couple of questions. What are some of the biggest hurdles you've had to overcome in getting to today, to launching this new plane, still getting the backing you wanted, and really, putting yourself as a market leader here at an early stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, I couldn't single out something. I think that it's multiple challenges at once. It's not just about building a plane. It's about building a company, building a fundraising apparatus, building a sales and marketing team that can also support airlines, all of this stuff. So, people generally ask me, like, what's the hardest part about building an electric plane? It's that, well, it's 100 things that you need to do in an aircraft program, and you get 99 things right, and you're going to end up being a sucker, right? Because, if you don't have your landing gears delivered on time, you're always, your aircraft is not going to fly. So that is the thing that's keeping me up. And also, challenging your assumptions. I think there's a lot of great quotes from development, Musk and all of these people, like you assume that you're wrong and have it as your goal to be less wrong and all that stuff, don't sunk cost fallacies, all of this stuff, it's about, and don't, drink your own Kool-Aid too much, I think, and think that the rules don't apply to you because you're a startup.
Yeah, well, I think that in that department, you're doing quite well, having rejected your own early drawings and the ES19 to listen to your engineers and the commercial team. So the results are definitely showing. Finally, what gives you the most hope about the future of sustainable aviation?
I mean, I think that there's, one thing that I thought was really hopeful about this. I remember when looking at this and doing research, like in Sweden, for instance, a country of like 10 million people, there was 400,000 drones sold. It's like it was, per capita, it was 12 times the amount of drones that were sold in the US. But it's like still like I'm happy that there's a new generation that is out there that is not afraid, that is understanding, that's tinkering with electric motors, that have done stuff like this. They're used to electric stuff. They worked on it with their skateboards and all of that stuff. I'm kind of like that's the thing that I think is really, it's coming from my teaching background as well, is that, like, how do we channel that? I look at my nephews and how good they are at, Minecraft and Roblox, and they're like, if we could just get them to be CAD engineers, they could be amazing. So I mean, I think that I feel hopeful that the new generation but I think that it's also puts a pressure on us to actually be approachable. I think the airline industry, building planes is the most exciting thing in the world, and so people should be but I think people are not being let in. It's too much jargon. It's too much, kind of a club for members only. So I want to err on the side of being transparent and being, sharing the story, and so that people can get inspired and see that the people that are working with this stuff is people, like they're people, and you can be one of them,
Yeah, no, that is definitely inspiring. I'm hoping you have a flood of resumes and applications after this podcast goes live.
I hope so as well.
The final part of this interview is what I call the rapid fire round, in which I'm going to ask you some personal questions, and hopefully you'll give me the first thing that comes to your mind. And people can get to know the personal side of you as well. Let's start with something simple that you've already given me a hint about. What do you do in your free time?
Oh wow! I had my wedding recently, and I play. I'm not going to do this. Is rapid fire round. Let's try another one. I can. This is late in the evening for me, so I can babble on for.
We'll come back to the wedding. Back to the wedding. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. I love the book on Skunk Works by Ben Rich. The last chapter, like all of that stuff. That's great. I'm obsessive with a bunch of books on workflow. Like I love the works of Edward Tufte. A visual display of quantitative information.
Let's do another easy one. What's your favorite airline?
Yeah. My favorite airline. Wow. It's it's tricky. Obviously, the people that we're working with are investing in us. I think United, Mesa, Air Canada, all of that, SAS, BRA. But I think there's a lot of. Seriously, it's very hard to say, but obviously those have been really, really good, and you get to know them very well.
Yep, absolutely. What's your most controversial opinion about sustainability?
I don't like when people say that we should spend. People think that it's about R&D, like it's about spending money on research and development, and I don't think it's the. I'm an academician, like I come from, that world, and I respect that. And I think the universities should be getting more money. But sometimes I feel that this is a mobilization effort to decarbonize. And the technical questions that are being solved, in universities are only a subset. And it's a different skill set actually than bringing people together and leading and mobilizing. And we haven't really found the instruments for supporting those mobilization efforts.
Okay, no, fair enough. That's a good point you've made. What's your favorite green city or country?
Actually, if you fly to Gothenburg, Sweden, it says in the airport, "Welcome to the most sustainable city in the world." So I would say come to Gothenburg. I don't know where they got that from, but it certainly is a nice city with trams that are running on electricity and buses that are electric, and a bunch of different industry technologies also being developed in the city.
Wow, brilliant. I do wish to visit someday. I have not been, but I would love to, maybe on one of your test flights when you start doing those. What about something that you still want to learn?
Oh, wow. I want to learn Portuguese. Because I have so many Brazilian engineers, so I want to know what they're saying. But yeah, I got the audio book and I started listening to that in my car, but I got tired after a while. So I'm still working on it. Yeah.
Try one of two. Either get Duolingo and practice your Portuguese, or spend this winter in Florianopolis surfing with your Brazilian teammates, and you come back learning Portuguese.
I don't know, I think that's great. I think my I'll try to block out some time to go surfing in Florianopolis.
What about the best advice you've ever received?
There's actually there's a piece of advice that I heard that apparently Elon Musk said at the AIAA conference sometime, but I've been Googling it, so if somebody of your readers find it or were there, they can say if he said it, but I think it's really, to me, it was something that really spoke to me, and it's like aerospace is about the signal and the noise. It's about the signal to noise ratio. It's about figuring out what is the value add, and what's the critical path? What's the chain you have to do? What are the important things to do? What's the signal? What is the thing you want to do? What you want to get across? And what are all the things that are distractions, that are noise, that are not getting you anywhere? What are the unnecessary battles you're picking? What are the engineering solutions that you could just remove? Like all of that stuff. I think that's because I've been working in the large aerospace programs, and you tend to don't know what's going on because it's so much bureaucracy and levels, and you don't really understand your role in it. And I think building an organization where everybody's seeing the signal, that's what I really want to work on.
Oh, fantastic! And is there a leader that you look up to?
Wow. I think there's a bunch. Obviously, I am a big fan of what Elon has done with the car industry and the space industry, which I have a background in as well. I really like Peter Carlson, which is a Northvolt here in Sweden, building up a new industry. He's also an advisor to my company. I think, I have some really like one of the keys that that I can attribute my success to is that I have some really good people, including Gustav Ahlströmer, who's on my board, Christian Garcia, my executive team. I'm humbled to be working with all those people.
Wow. No, fantastic. I think you're definitely on the right track. I truly admire the humility, the adaptability, and the accountability that you highlighted in the interview. This has been one of the more enjoyable and longer interviews I've done, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for opening up so much.
It's been my pleasure, and you have to invite me back in with a 2-year interval so that you can hold me accountable.
Let's do that. I will have that scheduled and sent in our diaries, but I really appreciate you opening up. Thank you so much, Anders, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. We hope you liked it and will share it with your network. Please also leave us a review. Awareness is the key to a green future. Your support will help our insights on sustainable aviation reach a wider audience. In addition, for every single listen of this podcast, we will plant a tree. And for every single review, we will plant 50 trees. You can also write to us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.